Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something pretty interesting. What makes a book a huge global bestseller? But we're doing it through a very specific lens.
That's right. We're looking at a particular list, just one list, of the all-time best-selling single-volume books. And it's based on a snapshot from, well, about a decade ago now.
Right. The source is a list put together back in December 2013 by 10mosttoday.com.
Yeah, and their whole goal was trying to identify the books with the highest reported sales figures worldwide. Crucially, they focused on copies actually sold.
Sold, yeah, that's a key distinction, isn't it? Not just copies printed or, distributed.
Exactly. It makes a big difference to the numbers.
And they had some really specific rules for this list. These are super important to understand what we're actually looking at today.
Definitely. First off, it's strictly single-volume books.
Single volume. So if a story is often in, like a trilogy.
Well, they tried to count copies of the complete story sold as one item rather than each separate part. That was the aim.
Okay, makes sense.
And interestingly, they didn't separate out different language versions of the same book. The total sales number reflect the core story or text, regardless of language.
Got it. But here's where it gets, really specific to this list.
Yeah.
They explicitly kicked out comics and textbooks.
Right. The source's reasoning was, and this is their perspective, that they aren't proper books for this kind of comparison.
Okay. Debatable maybe, but those were their rules.
Fair enough. And probably the biggest rule, the most significant one, their list deliberately leaves out some of the most widely circulated texts ever.
Like what?
Major religious works, the Bible, the Quran, the Gita, and major political texts too, like the Communist Manifesto or quotations from Chairman Mao.
Whoa. Okay, leaving those out. That massively changes the picture of what best-selling means.
Completely.
So why? Why exclude texts that are arguably the most distributed books in history?
Well, according to the source 10mosttoday.com, the reason was all about the numbers, specifically the lack of exact verifiable sales figures.
Oh.
Because, these texts have been printed for centuries, often by many different groups, religious organizations, governments. Tracking a precise number of copies sold commercially across the globe is, well, basically impossible.
Right, compared to a book released by a modern publisher where you can track sales data.
Exactly. So this list focuses purely on books where they felt they could get reasonably reliable commercial sales data, at least up to that point in 2013.
Okay, so our mission here isn't just to, read off a top 10.
No.
It's really to unpack this specific list from 2013, understanding it's shaped by these very particular rules and, importantly, exclusions. What does the mix of books that did make the cut tell us about what achieves massive, measurable sales, especially when you filter out huge categories like religious texts or textbooks?
Right. Let's see what this unique snapshot reveals. Shall we start at the bottom of their top 10?
Yeah, let's do it. Number 10.
Kicking us off at number 10 on this 2013 list is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Published way back in 1937. By their count, in 2013, it had sold 70 million copies.
70 million. For a self-help book from the 1930s, that's pretty remarkable. It's not just the number, right? It's the endurance. Published during the Great Depression. And still selling strongly enough over 70 years later to hit the top 10 based on these specific rules.
It really speaks to a kind of timeless appeal, doesn't it? For practical advice, maybe motivational ideas. It shows massive, sustained sales outside of fiction or academic stuff.
Definitely a different kind of success story than, say, a novel.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, moving to number 9. This one's much more recent. The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. Published in 2003. It hit 80 million copies sold in just 10 years.
Wow, okay. That speed is incredible,
Yeah.
especially when you compare it to how long it took some of the others on this list. Decades, even centuries.
Yeah.
This one really shows the power of modern publishing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Global marketing, releasing it everywhere at once.
Totally. It's a 21st century phenomenon, a completely different kind of sales engine compared to books from earlier times.
Stark contrast. Okay, number 8.
Number 8 takes us way back again. She, A History of Adventure by H. Rider Haggard, published 1887, and it clocked in at 83 million copies by 2013.
So we jump from a 2003 global smash hit to a Victorian adventure novel. That's quite the shift.
It is.
She being on this list, it shows the incredible staying power some stories have. Proves that a novel written over a century ago could still rack up enough sales, even by 2013, to hang with modern blockbusters.
Especially a single, very popular adventure fiction book that fit their rules. It highlights that long tail of literary impact.
Yeah, definitely. All right, number 7.
At number 7, we've got The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. 85 million copies sold since 1950.
Ah, classic.
Yeah.
Cornerstone of children's fantasy. Its presence here counted as a single volume, even though it's part of the Narnia series. It just underlines the massive global reach and consistent sales power of beloved fantasy, especially for kids and families. Again, within that commercially published fiction space they're tracking.
A huge market, clearly. Following that, at number 6, another giant of fantasy, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. 100 million copies sold since it first came out in 1937.
100 million. That's a milestone. And you mentioned this source note, something interesting here. This is Tolkien's less successful book on their list.
That's what they indicate, yeah.
Yeah.
Which tells you something about what's coming up later.
Right. But The Hobbit hitting 100 million by 2013. It came out the same year as Think and Grow Rich.
1937, yeah.
It just shows that enduring power of, high fantasy world building. Captivates generation after generation.
It certainly set the stage. Now, number 5 is a big shift. Time, geography, everything. Dream of the Red Chamber by Cao Shuiqin, published originally in 1791, also hitting 100 million copies.
Okay, this one's fascinating. It's the oldest book on their list by far.
By a long shot.
And the only one not originally published in English
Yeah.
is from China. Its inclusion, despite being centuries old and from a completely different literary tradition, well, it pushes back against any idea that only Western books or recent hits can get these massive, measurable sales figures.
It's a really important point. A powerful reminder of global literary history outside the usual Western focus you sometimes see in bestseller lists.
Crucial perspective. Okay, number 4.
Number 4, we're back to genre fiction, specifically mystery. And then There Were None by Agatha Christie. 100 million copies sold since 1939.
Agatha Christie. The source notes she's the first female writer on this specific list.
Correct.
And 100 million copies for a single mystery novel. That's just astounding.
It really is.
It says so much about the universal appeal of a really well-crafted whodunit and, her incredible skill in that genre, consistently selling huge numbers for decades to land here by 2013.
Her sales figures are legendary. Okay, number 3, another much-loved, widely translated book, The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. 140 million copies sold since 1943.
Originally in French, right?
That's right.
140 million. That figure really highlights how a profound, maybe seemingly simple fable can just cut across language, culture, connect with readers everywhere.
Definitely.
It proves that huge commercial success isn't just for thrillers or self-help. It can come from these philosophical, almost simple stories that resonate really deeply. And crucially, it fit their rules. Single best-selling volume.
It's kind of in a category all its own, isn't it? A global phenomenon.
Truly. All right, we're nearing the top. Number 2.
Coming in at number 2, we're back to Middle-earth, The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. 150 million copies sold since 1954. And again, that's counting the complete story.
Wow. So Tolkien gets 2 spots in the top 10, as you hinted earlier.
He does.
That just speaks to the incredible sustained demand for his epic fantasy. 150 million copies of the full story sold by 2013.
That's huge.
It's a testament to its status as a cultural touchstone, always finding new readers, decade after decade. Arguably the most successful commercial fiction work when counted under these very specific rules.
An unparalleled achievement, certainly within this list's framework.
Okay, so that brings us to number 1. According to this 2013 list from 10mosttoday.com, the number 1 all-time best-selling single-volume book is
A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens.
A Tale of Two Cities. How many copies?
200 million copies sold since its publication in 1859.
200 million. Wow, that's a staggering number, significantly higher than anything else on their list.
It is a big jump from number 2.
Even compared to other books that have been around for a similar amount of time, like She,
Right.
Dickens' enduring popularity, obviously, and the huge appeal of this particular novel, it just meant it had accumulated this almost unbelievable number of measurable sales by 2013.
It crowned him the leader on this specific, quite restricted list, a truly monumental figure.
So let's recap. Looking at this snapshot from December 2013, based on these 10mosttoday.com rules, we see a list that spans centuries, 1791 all the way to 2003.
Yeah, huge range. And it covers classic literature, fantasy, mystery, self-help, even a beloved fable.
But it's absolutely crucial, as we've said, to keep remembering the boundaries they set.
Absolutely. Single volume. Copies sold, not just printed.
And those massive exclusions.
Yeah.
Major religious and political texts, comics, textbooks, all taken out, mainly due to difficulty tracking precise sales figures according to the source.
Right. So this list isn't claiming to be the most read books ever, or even the most printed.
No, it's specifically aiming for the highest measurable commercial sales figures within these tight constraints as of 2013.
Exactly. Which naturally leads to the big question. What does this particular list, defined by these very specific rules and exclusions, actually tell us? What does it suggest about global reading habits, and what drove massive verifiable sales, at least up to 2013?
Yeah, and here's where it gets really interesting, I think. When you consider this mix, you've got enduring classics from centuries ago sitting alongside relatively recent books that hit similar massive sales figures. What does that reveal about the nature of a bestseller across time? Especially when you constantly keep in mind the books the list didn't count and why it didn't count them.
Right. The absences are as telling as the presences.
Exactly. So what does this specific snapshot showing only what could be measured commercially back then make you think? What does it suggest about what makes a book resonate globally? And maybe what kinds of impact, what kinds of reach might not show up on a list like this at all?